Captain Jake Morrison had always prided himself on his ability to find humor in desperate situations, but staring down the barrel of complete annihilation was testing even his legendary optimism. The colony world of Kepler Prime stretched around him in all directions: red dirt, stubborn mining equipment, and about 300 colonists who'd signed up for adventure and reasonable compensation, not glorious last stand against an alien empire. The Zephyrian forces had arrived at dawn, their ships blotting out the twin suns like metallic storm clouds. Jake counted at least 50,000 troops arranged in perfect formation across the valley, their crystalline armor catching the light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Each soldier stood motionless as a statue, waiting for orders that would probably involve reducing the human settlement to its component atoms. "Well," said Tommy Chen, Jake's former mining foreman turned reluctant lieutenant, "this is significantly worse than that time the fusion reactor started speaking ancient Greek." "At least the reactor was just having an existential crisis," Jake replied, checking his weapons charge for the 15th time. "These folks look like they're here for business." The ragtag defense force Jake had cobbled together from retired veterans, mining engineers, and one very determined colonial botanist named Sarah who insisted her greenhouse experience qualified her for military service, huddled behind hastily constructed barriers. Their equipment consisted of mining lasers repurposed for combat, construction mechs that might survive one direct hit, and enough stubborn human determination to power a small starship. "Captain," called Rodriguez from her position near the communication array, "I'm picking up massive energy signatures from their command ship. Whatever they're planning, it's going to be spectacular." "Spectacular in the pretty fireworks sense or the instant vaporization sense?" Jake asked. "The second one, unfortunately." Jake had been a terraforming engineer before the war, someone who specialized in making dead worlds bloom with life. The irony of dying on a world he'd helped design wasn't lost on him. Kepler Prime had been one of his prouder achievements: atmospheric processors that worked in harmony with the existing ecosystem, mineral extraction that actually improved soil quality, and a colonial layout that prioritized sustainability over profit margins. The Zephyrian Empire had been conquering human colonies for 18 months now, moving through space with the methodical precision of a cosmic lawn mower. 17 worlds had fallen to their advance, each one absorbed into their expanding territory with minimal fuss and maximum efficiency. Intelligence reports suggested they weren't particularly cruel conquerors, they simply arrived, overwhelmed local defenses, and incorporated new territories into their empire with bureaucratic thoroughness. Movement in their lines, Sarah reported from her position behind an overturned hover truck. "Something big is happening." Jake raised his binoculars and immediately understood why Sarah sounded concerned. The Zephyrian forces were parting like a metallic sea, creating a corridor that led directly toward the human position. Through that corridor walked a figure that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. The Zephyrian Empress was unmistakable. Intelligence briefings had described her as their supreme military commander, a tactical genius who'd never lost a battle in 30 years of expansion. But the briefings hadn't prepared him for the reality of her presence. She moved with liquid grace, her ornate armor seeming to flow rather than clank, and even at a distance Jake could see the characteristic pointed ears that marked her as Zephyrian royalty. "Is it just me," Tommy whispered, "or does she look like she's taking a casual stroll through a war zone?" "Maybe it's a cultural thing," Jake suggested. "Maybe Zephyrians consider impending massacre to be relaxing." The Empress stopped approximately 50 meters from the human barricades, close enough that Jake could see her amber eyes scanning their defensive positions with the calm assessment of someone evaluating furniture arrangements. Her expression was unreadable, but something about her posture suggested this wasn't proceeding according to standard Imperial protocol. "Should we surrender?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "I mean, we could try fighting, but I've seen the tactical projections. We'll last approximately 12 minutes against those kinds of numbers. 15 minutes if we're really creative with the mining charges," Sarah added helpfully. Jake considered their options, which ranged from hopeless defiance to slightly more creative hopeless defiance. His engineering background had taught him to look for elegant solutions to complex problems, but this particular equation seemed to have only one variable: how dramatically they wanted to lose. The Empress raised her hand. Jake tensed, expecting some kind of signal for the final assault. Instead, she pointed directly at him with the precision of someone identifying a specific star in a crowded constellation. The effect was immediate and impossible. Every Zephyrian soldier in the valley dropped their weapon. The sound of 50,000 crystalline blades hitting red dirt created a musical cascade that echoed across the landscape like wind chimes in a hurricane. Jake blinked several times, wondering if the stress of impending death had finally caused his brain to manufacture a more pleasant hallucination. "Did that just happen?" Tommy asked. "I think so," Jake replied, though his voice carried all the certainty of someone discussing quantum mechanics after a severe head injury. The Empress began walking toward their position, her movements creating small dust clouds that sparkled in the alien sunlight. Behind her, the Zephyrian army remained perfectly still, their weapons abandoned but their formation intact. Jake found himself standing up from behind the barricade, drawn by a curiosity that overrode every survival instinct evolution had given him. The Empress approached with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through the judicious application of superior firepower. When she was close enough that Jake could see the intricate patterns etched into her armor, she stopped and spoke in perfect standard Galactic. "You're the reason we surrender." The words hung in the air like a confession, and Jake realized that whatever happened next was going to be significantly more complicated than a simple military defeat. Jake stared at the Zephyrian Empress, trying to process words that seemed to have been assembled by someone with only a theoretical understanding of military conquest. "I'm sorry, did you just say surrender? Because I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be our line." The Empress tilted her head, studying him with the intensity of someone examining a particularly fascinating scientific specimen. "Your species has an interesting tendency toward humor in crisis situations. Our psychological profile suggested this, but experiencing it directly is unexpected. Well, when you're facing impossible odds, you can either laugh or cry," Jake said, acutely aware that he was having a casual conversation with someone who could presumably order his immediate disintegration. "Laughing tends to be better for morale." "Fascinating." The Empress moved closer, and Jake noticed that her armor seemed to shimmer with internal light, responding to some kind of bioelectric field. "I am Empress Valnara of the Zephyrian Empire. And you are Captain Jake Morrison, formerly of the Terraforming Corps, currently of the Kepler Prime Defense Force." Jake blinked. "You've done your homework." "I have done considerably more than homework," Valnara replied. "I have studied your psychological profiles, your engineering specifications, your childhood educational records, and your preference for coffee over synthetic stimulants. That's either very thorough intelligence gathering or the galaxy's most elaborate setup for a dinner invitation," Jake said, then immediately wondered if joking about dinner with an alien empress qualified as some kind of diplomatic incident. To his surprise, Valnara's lips curved upward in what appeared to be amusement. "Your species' capacity for finding levity in serious situations is documented, but witnessing it directly is quite remarkable." Behind the Empress, Jake could see Zephyrian officers approaching with expressions that suggested they were having significant difficulty processing current events. The tallest one, wearing armor with additional decorative elements that probably indicated high rank, spoke rapidly in the melodic Zephyrian language. Valnara responded with what sounded like calm authority, though Jake caught undertones that might have been exasperation. She turned back to him. "General Kithra is concerned that my decision to surrender violates several thousand years of military tradition." "I can understand his confusion," Jake said. "This is definitely not how I expected this battle to go either." "It is not a battle," Valnara corrected. "It is a fulfillment." Jake glanced back at his ragtag defense force, who were maintaining their positions but looking increasingly bewildered by the turn of events. Tommy was making elaborate hand gestures that probably meant, "What the hell is happening?" while Rodriguez seemed to be running diagnostic checks on her equipment in case reality had malfunctioned. "Fulfillment of what, exactly?" Jake asked. Valnara's amber eyes seemed to glow with internal light. Ancient prophecies speak of a bridge builder, one whose presence would compel our empire to abandon the path of endless conquest. Someone whose neural patterns and genetic markers would prove compatible with our most sacred technologies. Jake processed this information with the methodical approach he'd learned during his engineering training. So you're telling me that your entire empire has been conquering human colonies because of fortune cookies with delusions of grandeur? The Empress actually laughed, a sound like crystalline bells caught in a gentle breeze. Your irreverence is precisely what the prophecies described. Yes, Captain Morrison, we have been searching for you specifically. Me specifically, or me as in, some random human who fits the criteria? You specifically. Velnara's expression grew more serious. I have been dreaming of you for months, Captain. Dreams that showed me your face, your voice, your particular combination of engineering knowledge and stubborn optimism. Dreams that guided me to this world. Jake felt his worldview performing several rapid somersaults. Okay, that's definitely not standard military intelligence. That's more in the realm of cosmic coincidence or elaborate psychological warfare. Neither, Velnara said. It is the result of quantum entanglement between consciousness and destiny, a phenomenon my people have studied for millennia but never fully understood. General Kithra approached and spoke again in Zephyrian, his tone carrying what sounded like urgent concern. Velnara nodded and turned back to Jake. My general reminds me that protocol requires certain formalities. Will you accompany me to my command ship so that we might discuss the terms of our surrender? Jake looked back at his defense force, then at the thousands of Zephyrian soldiers standing motionless around their abandoned weapons. The entire situation had moved so far beyond normal military engagement that he suspected standard operating procedures had simply given up and gone home. Will my people be safe while we're having this discussion? He asked. They will be safer than they have been since our ships arrived, Velnara assured him. My army will maintain position but take no hostile action. In that case, Jake said, I accept your invitation. Though I have to warn you, I've never negotiated the surrender of an interstellar empire before. My experience is mostly limited to arguing with mining equipment and convincing atmospheric processors to work correctly. Perhaps, Velnara said, beginning to walk back toward the Zephyrian lines, those skills are more relevant than you realize. As Jake fell into step beside the Empress, he called back to his team. Tommy, you're in charge until I get back. Try not to accidentally start any wars while I'm gone. No promises, Captain, Tommy replied. But we'll keep the coffee warm. Walking through the Zephyrian army was like moving through a forest of living statues. Thousands of soldiers stood in perfect formation, their crystalline armor catching the light like a field of technological flowers. None of them moved as Jake passed, but he could feel their attention like a physical weight. They're waiting for orders, Velnara explained. Orders that will not come until we have completed our discussion. And if our discussion doesn't go well? Then, Captain Morrison, we will have discovered that prophecies can be wrong, and the galaxy will continue as it always has. Velnara paused. But I do not believe that will be the case. Jake looked up at the Empress's command ship, a crystalline structure that seemed to grow from the ground rather than land on it, and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The interior of Velnara's command ship defied every assumption Jake had about alien technology. Instead of sterile corridors and blinking control panels, he found himself walking through spaces that felt more like living art installations. The walls pulsed with soft bioluminescence, and the floor seemed to respond to their footsteps with gentle harmonics that created an oddly soothing melody. Your ship is beautiful, Jake said, running his hand along a surface that felt warm and almost organic. It's like being inside a musical instrument designed by someone who really understood acoustics. Zephyrian vessels are grown rather than built, Velnara explained as they moved through corridors that curved in mathematically pleasing spirals. They develop in harmony with their intended purpose, creating spaces that enhance both function and psychological well-being. That's incredible. The engineering principles alone must be fascinating. How do you maintain structural integrity while allowing for organic growth patterns? Velnara paused, turning to study him with renewed interest. Most warriors would ask about weapons capabilities or defensive systems. I'm not really a warrior, Jake admitted. I'm an engineer who got drafted into playing soldier because someone had to organize the defense. My first instinct is always to understand how things work. They entered what appeared to be the ship's central command chamber, a circular space dominated by a holographic display showing the planetary system in three-dimensional detail. Several Zephyrian officers stood around the perimeter, their expressions ranging from professional attention to barely concealed bewilderment. General Kithara, Admiral Zefto, Strategic Coordinator Mirren, Velnara said, indicating each officer in turn. May I present Captain Jake Morrison, the reason for our current change in operational parameters. Admiral Zefto, whose armor featured elaborate aquatic motifs, spoke in rapid Zephyrian. Velnara's response carried tones of patient authority, and Jake caught what sounded like his name mentioned several times. The Admiral wishes to know if you are aware of the significance of this moment, Velnara translated. I'm aware that it's definitely the strangest day of my life, Jake replied. Beyond that, I'm operating on limited information. Velnara gestured toward the holographic display, which shifted to show a distant star system dominated by a massive world with crystalline continents. Our homeworld, Zephyria Prime. For the past century, it has been dying. The display zoomed in to show details that made Jake's breath catch. Cities that looked like they'd been carved from living gemstones stretched across vast continents, but many of the structures were dark, their light fading like dying stars. What's causing the deterioration? Jake asked, his engineering mind immediately focusing on the technical aspects. Our planetary core is failing, Strategic Coordinator Mirren said in accented but clear Standard Galactic. Ancient terraforming systems that have maintained our world for millennia are experiencing cascade failures. Jake studied the readouts flowing around the holographic planet. These energy patterns, they look like quantum resonance displacement. Someone tried to artificially stabilize the planetary core using consciousness-linked technology. The Zephyrian officers exchanged glances that carried significant meaning. Velnara nodded slowly. Our ancestors attempted to create a symbiotic relationship between the planet's core systems and the collective consciousness of our people. For thousands of years, it worked perfectly. But consciousness is inherently unstable, Jake said, understanding beginning to dawn. Any system that relies on mental patterns for stability will eventually experience drift as the population changes, evolves, or faces trauma. The expansion wars, General Kithara said grimly. Decades of conflict have altered our collective consciousness. The harmony that once sustained our world has become discordant. Jake walked around the holographic display, studying the technical specifications from multiple angles. You need someone whose neural patterns can interface with your planetary systems and recalibrate the quantum resonance to account for the changes in your collective consciousness. Someone whose mind works differently than ours, Velnara said. Someone who can serve as a bridge between what we were and what we have become. And you think I can do this because your neural patterns show unprecedented compatibility with our technology, Admiral Zeftal said. We have tested thousands of candidates from dozens of species. None showed even minimal resonance until we encountered human brain patterns. Jake felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. So your entire expansion campaign has been a recruitment drive for planetary maintenance technicians? In the most reductive sense, yes, Velnara said with what might have been embarrassment. Though we also genuinely believed conquest was our destiny until the dreams began. The dreams where you saw me specifically? Dreams where I experienced your memories, your way of thinking, your approach to solving impossible problems. Velnara's amber eyes seemed to glow brighter. Dreams where I felt your determination to build rather than destroy, to find solutions that benefit everyone involved. Jake looked around at the assembled Zephyrian leadership, then back at the dying world displayed in the hologram. What exactly would this process involve? Assuming I agreed to help, which I haven't decided yet. Neural interface with our planetary consciousness matrix, Strategic Coordinator Mirren explained. Your mind would become temporarily linked with our collective awareness, allowing you to recalibrate the core systems from within. Temporarily. Velnara's expression grew more serious. The process would require a permanent neural bond with someone who can serve as your anchor in our consciousness matrix. Someone who can guide you through our mental landscape and ensure you don't become lost in the collective awareness. And I suppose you're volunteering for anchor duty? I am the only Zephyrian whose dreams have shown compatibility with your consciousness, Velnara said simply. The choice would be yours, but I am the logical candidate. Jake studied the holographic planet, watching the slow pulse of failing energy systems. If this works, what happens to your empire? Do you go back to conquering worlds, or do you find a new hobby? Our expansion was driven by desperation, General Kithara said. A search for solutions to save our dying world. If you can provide that solution, then we become what we were meant to be, Velnara finished. Builders and guardians rather than conquerors. Jake felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You know, I've spent my entire career making dead worlds come alive. I've just never tried it on a planetary scale with alien technology and interdimensional consciousness linking. Is that a yes, Captain Morrison? Velnara asked. This is either the most important engineering project in galactic history or the most elaborate way anyone has ever committed suicide, Jake replied. But yes, I'll help you save your world. The relief that passed through the assembled Zephyrian officers was almost palpable. Velnara stepped closer to Jake, her expression mixing gratitude with something deeper. There is one more thing you should know, she said quietly. The neural bonding process, it will allow us to share consciousness completely. You will experience my memories, my emotions, my understanding of the universe. And I will experience yours. Jake looked into her amber eyes and felt that same inexplicable connection he'd experienced on the battlefield. Will we still be ourselves afterward? We will be ourselves, Velnara said, and something more. The neural interface chamber looked like something that had been designed by engineers who'd read too much poetry and decided that technology should be beautiful as well as functional. Crystalline formations grew from the floor in spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm, and the air itself shimmered with energy that made Jake's skin tingle. So, he said, examining the organic-looking interface crown that would connect his consciousness to the Zephyrian planetary matrix, on a scale of 1 to instant brain death, how dangerous is this procedure? Velnara, who was preparing her own neural interface, paused to consider the question with scientific thoroughness. Historically, consciousness linking with untested neural patterns has resulted in anything from mild disorientation to complete personality dissolution. That's reassuring, Jake said. I particularly like the complete personality dissolution part. Very confidence-inspiring. However, Velnara continued with what might have been amusement, my dreams suggest that your consciousness is remarkably resilient. Also, I suspect that your tendency toward humor in crisis situations may actually provide psychological protection against mental fragmentation. Jake settled into the interface chair, which molded itself to his body with unsettling accuracy. Great. My complete inability to take anything seriously might save my sanity. There's a sentence I never thought I'd say. The process began with a gentle tingling sensation, like being massaged by very considerate electricity. Jake felt his awareness expanding beyond the boundaries of his skull, touching something vast and complex that hummed with the collective thoughts of an entire civilization. Then Velnara's consciousness joined the link, and everything changed. Jake experienced her memories as if they were his own. Growing up in crystalline palaces that sang with harmonic frequencies, learning to command fleets that moved like living things through the void, feeling the weight of an empire's destiny pressing down on young shoulders. But more than memories, he felt her emotions, the loneliness of absolute authority, the desperate love for a dying world, and the growing certainty that conquest could never heal what was truly broken. In return, Velnara experienced his life, childhood on Earth's struggling colonies, the excitement of making barren worlds bloom with life, the satisfaction of solving problems that seemed impossible until someone approached them from an unexpected angle. She felt his curiosity about everything, his refusal to accept that anything was permanently broken, and his genuine belief that the universe was fundamentally more interesting when different species worked together. "Your mind is remarkably orderly," Velnara's voice echoed through their shared consciousness. "Like a workshop where every tool has its designated place. Your mind is like a vast library with sections devoted to things I didn't know existed," Jake replied. "Also, you have excellent taste in memories. That sunset over the crystal cascades was absolutely beautiful." They reached the planetary consciousness matrix, and Jake felt his awareness touch something that defied description. Zephyria Prime wasn't just a planet, it was a living entity with its own thoughts, dreams, and pain. The world's suffering resonated through the link like a constant ache, the slow dissolution of harmony that had sustained it for millennia. "I can see the problem," Jake said, his engineering mind automatically analyzing the quantum patterns that govern the planetary systems. "The consciousness matrix is trying to maintain stability using outdated parameters. It's like trying to run modern software on ancient hardware." Working together, their combined awareness diving deep into the planet's core systems, they began the delicate process of recalibration. Jake's technical knowledge merged with Velnara's intuitive understanding of Zephyrian consciousness, creating solutions that neither could have achieved alone. The process required them to rebuild the foundational algorithms that governed the planet's life systems, accounting for how the Zephyrian collective consciousness had evolved through centuries of expansion and warfare. Jake found himself designing quantum matrices that could adapt to emotional changes, while Velnara provided the cultural and psychological framework that would make such adaptation meaningful. "There," Jake said as the final calibrations locked into place. "The system should now be able to evolve alongside your people rather than requiring them to remain static." Through their shared consciousness, they felt Zephyria Prime respond to the recalibration. Across the planet, failing energy systems began to stabilize, dark cities started to glow with renewed life, and the harmonic frequencies that had sustained Zephyrian civilization for millennia began to sing again. But the neural link revealed something else, something that neither had expected when they began the process. "Jake," Velnara said softly through their connection, "I need to tell you something." "I know," he replied, feeling the same emotions flooding through their shared awareness. "I can feel it too." The consciousness linking had done more than solve a technical problem, it had created a connection between them that transcended species, culture, and the vast distances between worlds. They had experienced each other's thoughts, emotions, and dreams so completely that the boundaries between self and other had dissolved entirely. "Is this what love feels like when it happens across dimensional barriers?" Jake asked. "I believe so," Velnara replied. "Though I suspect poets in both our species would describe it more elegantly." As they began to withdraw from the planetary matrix, Jake felt the weight of decision settling around him. The neural link would remain permanently active, they would always be able to sense each other's thoughts and emotions, always be connected across whatever distances might separate them. "So," he said as they returned to normal consciousness in the interface chamber, "I have a choice to make." Velnara nodded, her amber eyes reflecting the soft light of the crystalline formations. "You could return to Kepler Prime, resume your life as a colonial engineer. The neural link can be maintained across any distance. Or you could stay with me. Help rebuild an empire that will focus on restoration rather than conquest. Become co-ruler of a civilization that spans dozens of worlds." Jake looked at the monitoring displays showing Zephyria Prime's restored energy patterns, then at Velnara, whose presence he could now feel like a warm constant in the back of his mind. "You know," he said, "I've spent my entire career making dead things come alive. Planets, ecosystems, mining equipment that everyone else had given up on. But I've never tried to resurrect an entire civilization's sense of purpose. Is that a yes?" Jake felt their shared consciousness resonate with possibilities, worlds that could be healed rather than conquered, technologies that could be shared rather than hoarded, and an empire that could become something unprecedented in galactic history. "It's a yes," but I'm keeping my engineering credentials because someone needs to maintain all this miraculous technology, he said. Also, I'm going to need regular communication with my team on Kepler Prime. Tommy will never forgive me if I disappear without proper documentation of this whole process. Velnara smiled, the expression carrying harmonics through their neural link that felt like music made of pure joy. Emperor Jake Morrison of the Zephyrian Empire. It has an interesting sound. Co-Emperor, Jake corrected. This is definitely a partnership operation. As they left the interface chamber, Jake realized that his simple life as a colonial engineer had just transformed into something that would probably require its own section in galactic history textbooks. But looking at Velnara, feeling the warmth of their connection and the excitement of an empire ready to become something entirely new, he found himself looking forward to the challenge. After all, he'd always preferred building things to tearing them down. And building a better future for two species simultaneously seemed like exactly the kind of impossible engineering project he'd been training for his entire life.